Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Amitabh Behar to our interview mentorship talk series. Amitabh, as you know, is currently the CEO of Oxfam India and a renowned global civil society leader. He is also the vice chair of Invicus, a global civil society alliance spread across 175 countries. Coming to today's topic, the topic for today is multiple dimensions of inequality in India. It's a very broad topic. Normally, when we speak about inequality, we tend to limit it to only the economical aspect. So today, we'll be dealing with in a much broader canvas. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules. The session would be for 1 hour, and the first 30 minutes would be taken up by Amitabh, and the latter part, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. Please put in your questions in the chat box and I'll take it up and moderate the session. Please do remember to keep your mics and video turned off. Over to you, Amitabh.
Thank you, Anton. So thank you for inviting me. Would have been good to do this when I was in Kerala for some visit. So hopefully COVID times will get over soon and I'm there. I would have really loved to be there. And you know, there's no substitute for a face-to-face conversation.
True.
So yeah, so let me just start. You know, as Anton, you said, I will try and take 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then we do a conversation. So let me first start by our 2018 Oxfam Inequality Report. And this report is, you know, every report that we do is received very well by the media. I'm sure people who are here as participants would have read our reports, at least the news briefings based on that. So this report said that there were 9 people in India in 2018 who had more wealth than 50% of Indian population. So let me just, you know, underscore the figures. 9 people you can easily make them sit in an Innova, had more wealth than 65 crore people. As in, you know, let's just get this, the magnitude of the issue right. Indian population, as you know, the numbers are still not there, but everybody says it would be 130 crore, 135 crore now. So you're looking at 65 crore had less wealth than just 9 people. That's something that we need to look at. That's the story that I want to focus on. But let me also say, and that's why I'm happy, Anton, that you said it's not just about economic aspects. We need to understand inequality in its multiple dimensions. I think that's really critical for us to understand, to try and then figure out solutions or to tackle inequality. So let me just, you know, talk of the different kinds of inequalities that we face, which is, I think, you know, what my attempt is to try and just help us understand the inequalities, to hopefully help us see the inequalities with which we live, which is all around us. And sometimes we are either oblivious of that, or sometimes we are blind to it because we are not we do not have the lens. So I'm going to talk 3 sections. The first section to try and tell you about the different kinds of inequality. The second is then to understand what are the underpinnings of it, why inequality is a problem. And third, look at what could be the solutions. But let me first, you know, and then spend more time on what are the kinds of inequality. I was in Parbhani a few years ago. As you know, that's a district in Maharashtra, in Marathwada. And this was a trip that I was making because the area was, as many of you would know, was severely drought hit. In fact, every year there's a big drought there. And it was a drought hit period. As part of my work, I was there providing some relief, whatever we could provide. It was a very painful sight to be there, to see livestock actually dying because of lack of water. Women walking several kilometers just to get a pitcher of water home. That was their routine, morning, 3 hours, 4 hours walk to just get drinking water for the family. Difficult time. You are all very lucky in Kerala with lots and lots of water, but I'm sure you have seen how droughts can be devastating. And then I started my journey back. I reached Pune, and from Pune I was supposed to take my flight from Bombay. So I was driving from Pune to Bombay, and that's the time it just so happened that P. Sainath, which you would know, the famous journalist, many of you would know, do read his book. Incidentally, his book is also called Everyone Loves a Good Drought. It's a famous book. You must read that book. So he called me up for some reason, and then when I said that I'm going to Mumbai by the Pune Mumbai Express Highway, he said, you don't sleep, keep awake and keep looking on the billboards that you would see. And I did that, and trust me, it was more devastating than the drought that I had seen, because the billboards were actually advertising an apartment in Mumbai which had a swimming pool for each flat. So, Anton, I don't know if you can put that picture. You have that picture. So it was really painful to, the previous day, you have seen the drought happen. And then what you're seeing is every 5 kilometers, an advertisement of a builder selling flats in which you have swimming pools. So this is the picture. Thank you, Anton. This is the picture that was there. I think the second picture also is the same one. Yes. Okay. So, every flat has a swimming pool. This was being sold. Just imagine, you have seen people walk several kilometers for hours just to get drinking water. And here you have every flat with a swimming pool. That's again the inequality in terms of access to resources, and something as fundamental as water. And it extends to natural resources. Just look at how Mumbai is planned. It's again, fascinating and painful. Whenever I take a flight to Mumbai, and when from the airport I go to central Mumbai, the fort area, again, people who know Mumbai, you cross a place where you see this 25, 27 floor building owned by Mukesh Ambani, which at one point of time was the most expensive building in the world, most expensive residence in the world. And just around that, within a couple of square kilometers, there would be lakhs of people who live in housing like this, what you're seeing. Even this picture on the right, what you're seeing, just see how the city is divided. On the left, you will see the picture of Mumbai, informal settlements, shanties. I don't know what you call that in Malayalam. In Hindi, they call it jhuggi jhopadi. And that's what you see. So that's the inequality that you see even in how we use urban spaces. Let me just move ahead. I don't know if you have some doctors. You can close this, Anton. So I don't know if you have doctors in the room here, but I do have doctors, and I've been working on this issues for a while. So I have my doctor friends with whom I've asked, what is the child sex ratio at birth? Because everybody is muted. Otherwise, I usually ask people, and people do get the right answer. Let me tell you, doctors say and that it should be around 1,005 boys for every 1,000 girls. That's the sex ratio which nature has given us, because girls are stronger, so they survive probably more. That must have been the logic as young girls. But do you know what is the child sex ratio in 0 to 6 age in India? I don't know, just if people know, in the chat box, if people write, uh, it is just 916 for every 1,000 boys, which essentially means that there are 84 girls missing in every 1,000 boys. Please underscore, this is 84 girls missing in every 1,000 boys. Just imagine what would that be in a population of 1.3 billion people. Amartya Sen has again written a lot about it, and he talks about the missing millions. It's not missing 84 girls, it's missing millions. And why is this happening? Anton, you can hear me? I'm frozen, so you can, yeah. Okay. So he's written about this missing millions. It is essentially about we are doing sex selection. This is abortions based on sex selection. That's what we are doing. And that's the whole problem, which is clearly a mark of patriarchy, that we are not even letting girls be born in this country. And the ratio that you're seeing is so skewed. So that's the level of inequality in terms of gender. I've talked of economic, I've talked of natural resource access, I've talked of gender. Let me just give you one more figure. In 2017, there's this very large, powerful movement called Safai Karamchari Andolan. Is that something people will understand, or should I try and translate that? Safai Karamchari, Anton? You're muted.
No, if you could just explain a word about it, that would be good.
Okay, Safai means cleaning,
Yeah, I
and
think it's
Karamchari, it is manual scavenging. Exactly. That's the movement. So manual scavenging. Okay, people would understand that.
Yes, they would.
So they came up with this startling data that in 2017, every 15 days, there were 10 people dying cleaning sewages, sewer lines in just the national capital region, Delhi and around, as you know, those few satellite towns that we have. 10 people dying every 15 days. Just imagine how much that would be in the country. And they had, these are murders. I would say these are not deaths. These are murders, because we tell them to go down the sewage full of shit, and they die of the poisonous gases there. And you must be reading that every other day it comes in the newspapers. But again, the inequality, mind you, they were all 15 who would die in those, all 10 who would die in that fortnight were all from one particular subcaste of Dalits, the Valmikis. So that's, the most undignified, which is inhuman, I would say, cleaning of shit. Intentionally, I'm saying shit. I want to use that word for us to understand what we're talking of. Is done by just one caste. That's the caste inequality that you see in this country. So, I hope I've painted a picture for you to understand that how inequality is all around us, and you need to look at it. And it goes, across development paradigms. You pick a development indicator, you pick, say, the education for the general population, education levels, and you pick it for Adivasi women. There would be almost a 25 to 30 point difference between the two. That's again a marker of inequality. So I think it's very important for us to be awake to these inequalities and understand if we really want to fight inequality. Let me just quickly talk of, particularly because it's been a COVID year. So, what's happened during the COVID year in terms of inequality. I really liked what the Secretary General of the UN said. He said, COVID has been like an X-ray, which has exposed all the fractures of the society that we have, and inequality being one of those big fractures. Powerful statement. And let me tell you how it has really exposed that. In globally, the 1,000 top richest people recovered whatever wealth they lost in just 9 months. They were back to from where they started. Whereas what they're saying is the poor people, which is at least 1/3 of the global population, will need at least a decade now to come back to their pre-COVID levels. That's the difference of inequality in terms of recovery. But it's further. Let me just give you a little more data. The top 10 billionaires of the world actually added $500 billion to their kitty. $500 billion, half a trillion. Let's remember, $1 is 70 Indian rupees. I'll not be able to even do the multiplication so quickly. $500 billion to their kitty, when most of the people are not able to get bread to their table. That's the level of inequality. India is not very different. In India, the top 10, or rather 11, because there was a tie at the number 10, top 11 billionaires in India actually made so much money during the COVID time that they could sustain the Ministry of Health of India for 10 years. That's the amount they've made. Another figure, they could have sustained the NREGA program, which is probably the largest program of India, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. They could have sustained that for 10 years. That is the amount they made during COVID, when Indian economy, as all of you would know, was contracting to the level of minus 24%. They were making these profits. The Indian billionaires, all dollar billionaires, actually gained 35% during COVID times. So, this inequality is, I would say, it's obscene. At the time, it's also when people were actually getting hit. And we saw those heart-wrenching stories of the migrant crisis, people not getting food, people losing job, not a shelter. And then on the other hand, you're seeing these pictures of people gaining 35%, or 11 people gaining so much that they could sustain the Ministry of Health. So in all this, what, I can go on, but I'm looking at the time. So, let me just say why inequality is not all right. And I'll give you two good reasons, and I'm sure you can think of many more reasons. But, one of the most surprising actors I want to quote, because it helps me build the argument, is the IMF, which actually was responsible for the policies that have led to these levels of inequality. IMF now, International Monetary Fund, is now saying that such levels of inequality would lead to socio-political breakdown of societies. And it is not conducive for either society or for the economy to continue with these levels of inequality. So there's both an economic argument, there's a political argument that the countries will not survive if you continue the path of these levels of inequality. And the second, I would say, which is for me a very dear argument, is that ultimately it's the Indian Constitution. If you go to the Indian Constitution, look at the preamble. What is the preamble essentially saying? The four specific, as the Supreme Court has said, the morality of the Constitution. It is justice, freedom, equality, and fraternity. And the equality bit gets completely lost with these levels of inequality. So even the Indian Constitution, we're not being true to our own Constitution. And then obviously the moral question. I really don't understand that how can people live with these levels of wealth. You would have obviously seen, again, those stories. These are at least for me, very, very painful stories that in the US, people are doing now vaccine tourism. They're doing charter flights initially when it was not available in the US to Dubai, where they're doing tourism and getting a vaccine shot. And on the other hand, people in even the US the poor people were dying of COVID. So, these are some of the arguments. Let me also say that it's not inevitable. Inequality is not inevitable. It's important for us to understand. Thomas Piketty, who's, according to many, one of the rock stars of economics in the current academic world. He's really, big now, like Abhijit Banerjee. So he actually has looked at Indian data itself. And he says that Indian inequality, levels of inequality in India in 2015 or so on, are now again higher than what we had in 1935. So pre-independence, he's looking at that. But what is important is he's saying from 1947, the policies that we had, it actually led to a decline in inequality. And we were looking at a more equal society. So again, people who are interested in inequality, they must certainly look at Piketty's work. Oxfam reports are easy to read. Thomas Piketty's work, it's called Capital, but read that. It's difficult reading, but it's at least the introduction is interesting, and he'll talk about how in India inequality was going down, and post 90s we have again changed it. So it's clearly inequality is a consequence of the economic choices we make. It is the economic paradigm that we are living with, which is essentially, as Oxfam keeps saying, it's rigged in favor of the super rich. And they are able to accumulate more wealth at the top, whereas there's no resource additions for the poor. What can be done? 4 or 5 specific ideas. And I'll stop with that. I'm looking at the time. I think I'm on time. So let me just give you 5 specific ideas. The first one, which is around COVID. This is a COVID year, so we need to focus on that. I think it's very, very critical that even now we do cash transfers to help people recover from the losses that they've made. The losses have been tremendous. You must be reading the unemployment data. Anyways, as you would have read just 1 year ago, or maybe now 1.5 years ago, we got the data that the unemployment was highest in 40 years in India. And COVID has only worsened it. So it would be critical, just giving incentives in several other stimulus packages that government of India has brought in are not going to be helpful. Direct cash transfers to the poor would be critical. The second, I think, and this is a very, very important point, is that if you look at the data across the world, where you have greater equality in education and health, those societies become more equal per se. And wherever you have greater inequality in access to education and health, those societies become more unequal. And in India, it's an extremely unequal access to health and education. Let me just give you the example of health, because we are talking of COVID. Everybody would know, and in Kerala, you have those hospitals. You have these super specialty hospitals, for which, again, people do health tourism in India. Certainly in Delhi, I keep, both reading stories. When I unfortunately need to go to a hospital, I actually see those foreigners from all around the world who are here for the brilliant doctors we have and brilliant services we have in those super specialty hospitals. But on the other hand, we still have the highest number of malnutrition in the world. We have the highest number of avoidable deaths in the world. You know that 1/3 of the global poor live in India. Global poor live in India. And let me just, coming back to the health, in terms of given these levels of low outcomes on health, we still have the fourth from bottom investments in the world in terms of public health. So if you do an investment table on the investments in public health, we are fourth from bottom, just above Burkina Faso and a couple of other countries. So it is very clear, if you don't make those investments, you will not get the right health outcomes that you're looking at. So investing in health and education should be a top priority if you want to fight inequality. Everybody should have the same access to quality education, health, and other public services. So it's education, health is the starting point, but it's very, very critical to also look at other services. So that's the second big point. The third, I think, is a point of looking at not minimum wages. I think we need to move beyond the minimum wage framework which we have in this country, because minimum wage is essentially about keeping you just above the poverty line. Whereas what we need is, and these are not, these are things that not I'm saying or not Oxfam. What we need to now look at living wage, and living wage is something which even ILO is talking of, and across the world people are talking about it. It's essentially about a wage which will give you a life of dignity. As in, if you're making helping the company make such tremendous profits, why can't they ensure that you have good access to education, health, your family has that, you have post-retirement benefits, you have shelter. That's something that should be a non-negotiable, and we should move to living wages. The fourth, and I know it's already 29, so I'll just take 2 minutes more and then I'll finish. Yeah. So another point is that we also need to ensure that our rich pay their fair share of taxes. And it's very, very critical. Let me just tell you, there's something called the Tax Justice Network globally. It's done a study, and it says, I think last year or year before last, that $427 billion were lost to countries only because of tax evasion. And India is again very, very high on tax evasion. And sometimes it's tax evasion, it's sometimes offshoring. It's fascinating. Just look at the companies. How many of our big companies have registrations outside India? The tax havens, whether it's Mauritius or Seychelles or I don't know where all, but these are countries which probably the first time I heard of them, not in geography class, but actually when I started working on taxes, that you can actually go to those places and where you have such tax benefits that you register there. So there are multiple ways of tax evasion happens. Everybody knows in India, we, from top to bottom, that's happening. There's so many people who say that Indian economy is probably half of, the white economy is half of the real economy. There must be an equal black economy. So they must pay their fair share of taxes. So I'm not even talking of, actually increasing taxes, just the fair share of taxes at the moment. But the second part, I would also say that there must be some kind of a tax on the super rich. I think it's not all right, according to me, that they also pay just the 30% of taxes, which anyways a higher income person pays. It can be much higher, and if you look at most of the countries, it's higher. And again on this, what is very important is, because ultimately to fight inequality, the state needs resources. The tax GDP ratio, the taxes that the government collects in most of the countries, in the Western liberal democracies, for instance, a Canada or a Sweden, it's almost up to 45% tax GDP ratio. In even our BRIC countries, so Brazil, South Africa, Mexico, it's around 25%. And we are hovering around 15 to 16, 17%. So we need to get it right. Otherwise, we'll not be able to move beyond. So, these are some of the concrete ideas that could be worked on. What I would just say is that, I think inequality is morally unacceptable. It's a scandal we cannot continue living with it just because of the economic argument, the political argument, or the moral argument. And we'll not be able to just do with band-aid solutions, a CSR here or a charity there. We need fundamental restructuring of how our society, how politics is organized. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Amitabh, for a very enlightening session that was strewn with startling statistics and reinforced by very painful imagery. I'm very sure that all the aspirants got a very clear picture of how inequality operates, the causes, the implications, as well as possible solutions which we discussed. So I think we'll throw the session open for questions. I'll take the first question. So the question is, will a system of taxing the rich more, as suggested by economics like Bregman, be possible in India to reduce economic inequality? Will
Sure. Yeah. So absolutely, as in the names that you have, Rutger, Bergman, Jyoti is also part of that. Jyoti Ghosh, if I'm sure this is an economic student who's talking of this. In fact, our new inequality report, Oxfam's inequality report, which I think aptly called the inequality virus. So while the COVID was big, we are saying inequality is also like a virus. It's going to make the whole globe hollow. In that, we have talked of this, and in India also, I think a wealth tax is something that we must have, at least for the COVID year. Argentina has already done that. So there's absolutely no reason why we can't do it. There are countries who are doing it. So it is important. We just need the political will for it. If the question is, will the political will be there or not? That's a different question. It's doable and it must be done. And that's the ask that we must have.
Okay. Just following up on that question. See, as you told, there are a lot of many individual billionaires, but some people argue that they are billionaires because they are smart. But in your talk, you mentioned that it's the system that is rigged in favor of them. Can you please elaborate on that a bit more?
Sure. And just tell me, as in, this year, if you look at Mukesh Ambani's wealth going up, it is, he was earning 60 crores per hour. Is that in any way possible if the system is not rigged? What a man can do, that man will earn 60 crores, whereas the most hardworking people that you know, who are either toiling in the fields or even offices, are not going to get even if that's 60,000 rupees, they're not going to get, so many of them don't even get 600 rupees for that. So what is really ultimately the relation between labor and capital is the big question. Why do we have such returns on capital? Just because somebody has the capital, why does all the return go and sit with the capital and not with labor? That's the question that we need to ask. And it's interesting. And these are questions I'm happy that at least now it's not just who people like us who are asking this question. Last year, I was at Davos. As everybody knows, Davos is the World Economic Forum. The super rich were there from all around the world. It's their ski destination, but they also come for the World Economic Forum. But in that I was doing my inequality report. But what was good was, at least even as a rhetoric in the conferences, in the discussions, they were saying the time for shareholder capitalism is over. These are the super rich saying that. Sorbs, who's the founder of World Economic Forum, which is the mecca of the super rich, he said that the time for shareholder capitalism is over. We need to look at stakeholder capitalism. And when he talked of stakeholder, he actually even includes the supply chains. So not just the person who's working in your own industry. You ultimately get a lot of stuff which is feeding into your industry. Even they should be paid living wages, etc. So there is this recognition that it is not all right. So that's the question. If it was a quibble about why does a person get 500 rupees and why does a person get, say, 5,000 rupees? I would have entered into that argument. I hope I have made my point clear.
Yes, yes, very much, very much. We have an interesting question here from Deepak. He asked about the Kudumbashree mission. You know, the Kerala Kudumbashree mission. Can that be a template for poverty eradication and gender empowerment across states?
Okay, so let me just say that it would be half-baked response, because ultimately Kudumshree is something which is fairly large. I did interact with Kudumshree quite intensively, but almost 15 years ago, when it was just beginning. So I really don't know how it is. But the fundamentals of Kudumshree are something which certainly can be a powerful tool of poverty eradication and gender women's empowerment. So the whole idea of collectives and they doing the businesses at the local level. But as I remember, Kudumshree was going one step beyond just doing self-help groups. Is powerful, and that's how the state also. I remember I used to come to Kerala then every month in 2002 and 3 and 4. I used to work with the Swiss Development Corporation, and we were supporting the government of Kerala then, with the decentralized planning process that was happening then. What I saw, that the state government was also doing very, very interesting things. So giving the contracts to Kudumshree groups, from cleaning contracts to cooking contracts, etc., which further aided it. So with a combination of the right policy and the women's collectives, I think it can be a very powerful way. And I would even say it can be a powerful way of even democratizing society.
Thanks for that, Amitabh. Ananta Lakshmi has a question for you. The question is, as you told, the inequality in political economy affects national security of a country in multiple ways. So how far can our domestic and international policy help bridge the gap between political economy and national security?
That's a slightly complicated one. So can you just, will you be able to unmute the mic and speak? As in, let me understand the question. Yeah.
Yeah, Ananta Lakshmi, can you please unmute and follow up on that question?
Just explain it a bit for me, then I'll.
Ananta Lakshmi, are you there?
You might be still muted if you're. No. Okay. So
I think she was. I think she was.
Yeah, why don't you give me your take of the question? Then I'll try and respond. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think she was trying to say, as you rightly pointed out earlier, we were saying that this can cause many political and social conflicts between groups.
Yeah.
And that can have national implications. So how can policy kind of be a solution for that? As in, what kind of policy would be a good way ahead to kind of reduce the policy?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the national security question, because if you're just talking of, say, the strife, the social economic upheaval, then it is about recognizing it and immediately taking steps. And I did talk of the several steps that are needed to fight inequality. Just look at, I work in the tea estates in Assam. Again, you have a lot of tea estates. I don't know how's the condition there, but in the tea estates, till a month ago, they were getting a minimum wage of 160 rupees. The tea estate workers, whereas even the NREGA gives them almost 280 rupees to 300 rupees. After a long battle, they've been able to get an increase of only 50 rupees. And that has also been now stayed by the High Court there. So, there are different locations where we can take action immediately. Like I talked of the health. Isn't it a pity that we have 25 AIIMS now, which are world-class hospitals? but people don't get uh, basic drugs in their neighborhood. As in, you all live in Kerala, so I don't know how many of you have visited other parts. Kerala is still much better in terms of your public health system and public education system. In most of the places, there are people dying of diarrhea. That's what is happening. So if we start investing in all that, we will be able to change inequality. We can have a more equal outcome, and that certainly will help in terms of domestic politics, but also in terms of our larger global standing. I don't know if that is addressed, but maybe when she is able to unmute, then we can.
Yes. As in, she just messaged that she had some network issues.
Okay.
So maybe we can follow it up later if she tell me.
Sure.
I think we'll move on to the next question. Dina has a very interesting and a specific question. We all know that the government is trying to do privatization and disinvestment of the PSUs. What would be its impact on inequality?
So let me just say that I don't know how many of you are economics student, but when you would have heard me, you would have realized that I'm more of a political scientist than an economist. But obviously, I work on these issues, so there is a basic understanding. But I get into questions more from the perspective of understanding democracy, politics. But coming back to the question, I would say that inequality is going to grow. The whole point that I was making in terms of what Thomas Piketty is saying, the state intervention that we saw from 1947 to the early 90s was responsible in ensuring that we were moving towards a more equal society. And if we are going away from that, what will happen once you have the PSUs being privatized? It is again going to be taken up by the same few billionaires. So what we are also seeing is, the next level of capitalism, which a lot of people are saying ultimately it's crony capitalism. Look at Adani, the number of businesses he's getting and taking over. Look at the airports he's buying. Again, an interesting figure that came up recently, 2-3 days ago, that he's the one who has gained the maximum in the world during COVID. Which is cronyism. Clearly, he was not one of the big industrialists, and he's suddenly in the last few years he's come up. So the concentration of wealth will continue. I think the fundamental question that I was asking earlier, how do we look at capital, and how do we look at labor? What is our greatest resource? Is labor the greatest resource? Or is it capital, which is the primary resource? And who gets the dividends of that resource? Will the capital get the dividends, or will the labor get it, or will it be distributed in a more fair manner? So I am, now I would personally, having heard me now for 40 minutes, you would have understood that if you ask me, I would actually ask for the returns in favor of the labor. Not in favor of the capital. However, let it at least be a fair distribution. That's the point that everybody's making. That's why I'm saying, what's interesting is that from a Marxist, and I talked of, say, a Jayati Ghosh, to now even a neoliberal economist, like even say an Arvind Subramaniam. Sadly, he had to resign from Ashoka. But even he is saying that these levels of inequality will not work. The International Monetary Fund is constantly saying this is not all right. I'm telling you that I was at Davos. Davos is saying, as I said, it is really, truly the Mecca of the super rich. They're saying that this inequality will not work. So without even getting into, who's a classical economist, who's a neoliberal, who's a Marxist, there's pretty much unanimity that these levels of inequality are not acceptable.
There's a follow-up question from Amal Bahulain on wealth tax. He asked whether wealth tax will disincentivize investments and lead to future equality of poverty.
Okay. So, I would not be able to give you the data, but there is a study which, while we were doing the inequality virus report, I did read the study, which clearly says that there's no evidence. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary. Even when we have had wealth tax earlier in history, there's been no decline in investments. So I would say that this is not founded on research. A lot of people do talk of that, but it is not. There's research which is actually telling us. I'll try and dig out, or if you just look at our inequality report, the reference would be there, which says that wealth tax does not decrease investments, and therefore, with the question of poverty as a follow-up of that. Yeah.
Amitabh, would you go so far as to say that inequality is a natural fallout of free market capitalism?
So, Anton, I don't want to, with so many of you in Kerala, I don't know how many of you would have been members. These are young people. How many of you would have been members of SFI, etc.? I don't know, but I don't want to get into that debate. I realized that once you get into that debate, then we end up doing ideological debates, and that's why I will repeat what I just said. That if the International Monetary Fund and professors of JNU, your professors at CDS, are all saying inequality is unacceptable. So this is not about an ideological frame. It is really about about what is not all right. If in terms of solutions, there might be a debate. But in terms of inequality, everybody is saying it's not sustainable. That's the point I'm making again and again. So even if it's free market, I would say it's really not free market. Still engaging with your question, it is way beyond free market now. What we are seeing is not free market. We are seeing crony capital. That's the issue. That we are looking at a larger. It's not just free market. It is a neoliberal worldview where you are even privatizing public resources. That's those are the big questions. How can education and health be privatized? And that's what we have done. And that's not the free market. At least in Europe, you will not find that. Even in the US, it's interesting. And these are all, I'm sure, students of higher education as well, people who are there. In the US, the university system is, yes, it's funded by philanthropists, but it is philanthropic capital. All universities there. They're not profit-seeking enterprises, like what we have started doing with the private universities in India. Except a few private universities, they've started seeing them as shops where you will start making money. So these are fundamental questions that we have about, that it's not just a free market, it's a particular neoliberal moment that we are in and which needs to be challenged.
Fair enough. We have an interesting question from Deepak again. His question is, can the concept of universal basic income solve global economic inequalities?
So universal basic income, as again many people are arguing, is important. It can be one of the important steps. So as I said earlier, that it would be a bouquet of actions and not just one action. So sure, yes, universal basic income is important, but like I said, look at the most equal societies. They have the most equal outcomes in terms of education they have. And Professor Amitabh Kundu has recently done a paper on this. So that's again something people could just Google him and find that. So, I would say we need to look at the entirety of the proposals that we have. And I'm sure there can be many other proposals. As in, I really like the idea of Kutumshri, because ultimately you're also saying it is how are you structuring your economic model? Do we make investments in extractive industries, or we actually make in people-centered enterprises? These are two different models. And Kudumshri is that people-centered model where the investment is in the communities, etc. And this, I would also say, would be much more green than the other models that we have. So it will also be environmentally sustainable.
Tiju has a question about accessibility in the higher education space. You spoke about the lack of access in the health space when you spoke about drugs and their inavailability and medical tourism. So he wants you to kind of throw light on the situation in higher education. Is it equal? How unequal is it?
It is extremely unequal in our country. Just again look at the gap between private schools and the elite private schools and the government sector schools. I'm intentionally saying elite private schools. I'm not talking of all the private schools. Look at the Pratham report. I don't know how many of you have seen the Pratham report. It's called Asar. It is basically saying that a class 5 student, it's almost like 50% of class 5 students are not able to read class 2 texts. So that's the level of inequality that you're growing up with. So obviously in higher education that will also happen. Look at the number of public universities, say liberal institutions. We talked of Ashoka. How many new public institutions have come up? Very few. In fact, what you have seen is almost a stagnation of the number of seats in, say, the largest universities, say Delhi University. I graduated from Delhi University almost now 30 years ago, 29 years ago, I graduated, and the seats from then have not moved. Whereas what you're seeing is, you are seeing this mushrooming of private universities. And as you would know, in Delhi University, I'm just talking because I live here and I've gone through this, in Delhi University, and then I went to JNU and I was paying probably 15 rupees, 20 rupees a month as fees. And in these private universities, you end up paying 10 lakhs a year. So whether it's an Ashoka University, whether it's a Jindal University, whether it's Amity, those are the levels that you're paying. So obviously, education is now beyond the reach of common people. That's also in some ways, for me, the death of a more equal society. When the public sector withdraws, this is what happens. Let me just give you one more example on this. I was doing a presentation on education for a Niti Aayog meeting. And it had all the education secretaries from all over the India, all over the country. And I just, for whatever reason, I took a pause and I said, these are all education secretaries, so all IAS must have been, now they must be in their 50s, early 50s kind of age bracket. I said, how many of you went to government schools? Trust me, 75% of them had their hand up. And I said, how many of your children go to government schools? It was not even 2 or 3 hands. And they also, I'm sure, were going to central schools or Navodaya Vidyalayas. So that's also something that we have seen, that, the quality difference. I come from a family of bureaucrats. I studied in a government school. And I think I've done reasonably well. But now I don't see anybody from the government servants who are sending their children to government schools. So in a way, just the inequality has grown so much that even people who were privileged were sending their children to the same schools where other children were coming. And that is a great leveler of society. But that's now completely changed. In my times, either there was Doon School and a Sindhya School, which were like, made for the princely Rajkumars, but most others were not going there. But now everybody goes to a private school.
Thanks, Amitabh. One question I had for you is, I know that you have worked a lot on sustainable development goals. In fact, I have worked with you and John on SDGs. How do you think COVID-19 has affected SDGs? Do you think it has kind of set back the SDG goals and targets, especially
Okay,
on equality and poverty? Yeah.
that's an interesting question for me because I've not thought about it. I think SDG has, the COVID has put a setback on pretty much everything that we were doing, which needs to be recognized. And the entire SDG framework, which was, I must say, in spite of the limitations it has, probably the most progressive global compact that we have seen in the history of world, where you are talking of economic issues, social issues, environmental issues, all together tied in a particular framework, where you're talking of leave no one behind. But on the other hand, let me say that COVID has been so devastating that this is the moment where we are going to reboot our economic systems, our political systems, our social systems. At least now when we're rebooting, if we start rebooting, say, with the SDG framework, I think we'll get different outcomes. Otherwise, SDGs look like much of rhetoric. It was an aspirational framework, but we were still working on the same trajectory. Can we now at least look at a new trajectory when we are rebuilding? The initial markers are not good. We are still going back to the old ways of working, but that's the opportunity. So the COVID can give you an opportunity. Yeah, that can be the only hope I would have.
Okay. Great, Amitabh. I think we have run out of time. Do you have time for one more question, maybe?
Sure.
Yeah. So I'll just follow up with the last question. Amitabh, I think technology is one of the greatest levelers. And how do you think technology can be a solution to this problem of widening inequality?
Good that you asked me this question, because I completely agree that technology, I'm reframing what you said, technology can be a great leveler, but it can also be a great divider. And to give you that figure, we did a study as Oxfam on education post-COVID. And I really didn't know this is interesting but painful, that only 4% in rural India had students, I'm talking of school students, had access to computers, and only 15% access to smartphones. So this whole thing, my daughter for the last 1 year, she was last week telling me I've completed 1 year of not going to school. But she has her own computer. We have now even given her a phone. So she's looking at the phone and the computer. She's really connected now. Her teachers are working on it, and it works. Whereas in rural areas, as I said, only 19% have access to a computer or a smartphone, which is critical for even attending those virtual classes that you're talking. If you go to the bottom 20%, then it is of the population, then its access is only 3% to computers and 9% to smartphones, which is what, 12%. The digital divide is so massive, and it's actually going to be so detrimental to the poor that it's not going to be a leveler. So sorry, in response to your question, I would say technology has the potential to be a leveler, but we have not used it. Again, technology has become an aid in monopolizing power and resources. And that's, again, one of the big challenges, that how do you look at technology which is more democratic, more egalitarian?
Thank you. Thanks, Amitabh. I think we have taken up all questions. I didn't address a couple of queries because they were answered in the session otherwise. Thanks, Amitabh. Thanks for covering this topic holistically, helping us identify the causes, the implications, and the possible solutions. It was wonderful having you. Thanks again for taking time out from your busy schedule and giving us this lecture. Thank you. Thanks, Amitabh.
Thank you. Thanks, Anton, and thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. All the best for your exams, interviews, whatever you're doing. Bye-bye.